Hello dear viewers, support me by subscribing to my channel and share my video if you like it, and also make sure you comment your thought. Now let's start the video. Jon Arryn. He watched the sail on the horizon start to diminish and sighed heavily. The day had been one of the most chaotic ones at King's Landing that he could ever remember. He'd woken to discover that Robert had, for some reason that he still did not understand, decided that he had to visit Storm's End at once. He'd found the king standing in the main courtyard of the Red Keep, almost juddering with impatience as he bellowed orders at scurrying servants. Ugh. Jon, Robert had barked at him. I need to talk to you. Need to visit Storm's End. Why, your grace, is there trouble in the Stormlands? And this had resulted in Robert staring around the courtyard for a long moment, visibly considering his words. Don't think I can explain it, Jon, the king finally admitted, almost shamefaced. Feel like I'm needed there, and elsewhere. I'll be back as soon as I can. It's just I need to be in Storm's End. Robert had then stared north grimly for another long moment. Keep everything in place here, Jon. I'm sorry to leave so suddenly, but he ran his hand over his beard thoughtfully. I need to get this cut, he muttered before catching Jon's eye again. I can't explain it, Jon. I need to be there and not here, and I know that this all makes no sense, but Robert held up his hands and clenched and unclenched them repeatedly. I can't put it into words. There's something in the wind. Jon, something in the wind. There's fighting up ahead. There's a war coming. I don't know who will be fighting or where or when, but I can feel it. It's in my blood, Jon, and I feel more alive now than I have since the Greyjoy revolt. Ah! Renly, get your arse over here. We leave on the next tide. And so he had, with just a small retinue, including Renly and Cerberus Anselmi. The former had had a word with Jon during one of the few moments of relative quiet. I don't suppose you know why my royal brother has decided to on this visit at such short notice, do you, Jon? None whatsoever, Lord Baratheon. The king seems to have decided on this trip today. Renly had scratched his beard thoughtfully. Odd. Even odder, I found him sparring with the master at arms this morning, with his warhammer. It left him exhausted but happy. They had both looked over at a corner of the courtyard, where Robert was getting his beard severely trimmed. All of this had left Jon with a feeling of great and very deep foreboding. Robert had perhaps picked up something about the great matter, but if he had, then why not stay and fight it out? And why go to the Stormlands? Why not confront the Queen? No, he must not have any idea about it all, otherwise Cersei would be in a cell, or be dead, and Robert would have confronted that traitorous Bozzard the Kingslayer already. So why Storm's End? He'd thought about telling the king everything, but they needed more time to move their forces into King's Landing without any of the other players around them knowing. Varys had to know. Whose side was he on, really? And what of Baelish? The more he learnt of him, the more he distrusted him. His web of financial affairs was wide and seemed to be a little too opaque in places. But there had been one good element to Robert's departure. His talk with Renly had borne some fruit. Bring back a stronger entourage of guards from Storm's End, he'd advised the youngest Baratheon. Men and lords you can trust. Renly had stared at him intently, before nodding slowly and saying that he understood. And now Jon stood at the docks and watched as the ship vanished off to the west. He was still amazed that Robert had taken a ship instead of riding out, but ships did not tire, nor they have to sleep at night. He wanted to get every mile out of every hour, and that worried him as well. Footsteps sounded to one side and he looked over to see Stannis approach. Lord Baratheon, my lord hand. Stannis looked out at the western horizon. The king's trip puzzles me. And me, but he felt that he had his reasons. We must await his return, and plan how we must tell him about this great matter. Stannis winced and then lowered his voice. He will not take it well, we must be prepared for that. And we must strike hard when we announce it. The Lannisters in this city will not take this lightly. We must be careful. Jon nodded tiredly. Gods, but I hate this city, he muttered. A city full of liars and conspiracies. The master of ships smiled thinly. I have always hated this place, my lord hand. 'Tis a place where men lie as easily as they breathe, but there are a few who can be depended on. He handed over a small roll of paper. Your son is safe at White Harbor. Sir Davos Seaworth sends word from there by Raven of their safe arrival. Lord Manderley has ordered that your son and his party be escorted to Winterfell by some 50 men. Jon took the paper with a frown. That's a strong escort. Why so many? Seaworth does not say. The handwriting is not his. He does not have his letters well, but I recognize Lord Manderley's hand. But he does say that he returns at once to King's Landing with the utmost dispatch, which means that he will risk everything to get back here quickly. I know Sir Davos Seaworth. He would not be returning with such dispatch, risking his ship, unless something was the matter. Add that to the strong escort for your son and I fear that he has news of some plot or other. Ice water seemed to flow through his veins for a moment, and then he shrugged it off. We will see what Sir Davos has in the way of news, he said eventually. Let me know the moment he arrives. He set his jaw. We have much to prepare for. When Robert returns we must confront him with this great matter. Can you have his bastard son moved from the smithy to perhaps the docks? We will need to keep the lad safe to use him as proof of the Queen's infidelity. It can be arranged, Stannis said curtly. Leave it to me, he nodded abruptly to Jon, and then strode off. As he returned his gaze to the western horizon, Jon sighed. He wished that his son was there so that he could hug the little boy. He suddenly had the strongest feeling that he might never see him again. Jory. The further they went from White Harbor, the easier his heart rested within him. It was easier to see danger on the road, easier to see everything. And there was also the fact that with every day that passed, the closer they got to Winterfell and home. There were two other things. With every day that passed, the little lordling seemed to change right before his eyes. At the start of the voyage, he had been a dull-eyed pale little wraith, afraid almost of everything and with a spiteful and slightly demented tone to his voice. Oh, and a little stupid. And now, well, he was tanned from the sun, he looked healthier, sounded cleverer, and he was so curious about everything that there were times when Jory wished that he could shut up for 5 minutes. The medicine was being reduced day by day, and Anna had told him that it was almost all gone now, that the little boy would soon be free of whatever it was. Which left the question of who had poisoned the boy and why. Anna, he knew, had her suspicions. Everyone who ever asks about the medicine is dismissed by Lady Arryn, she had told him. Everyone. I wonder why. The medicine makes him dependent on her, but I do not serve her. I serve Lord Arryn. He stole a look at the woman from the Vale. The two of them had been dancing around each other for some time now, and he wasn't sure where this dance would end. He was hopeful of getting a better look at that chest of hair for a start. And there was the other matter, the pull to the north. He felt it more strongly the closer they got to Winterfell, and he had no idea why. Manderley's men felt it too. They were traveling in the right direction and they all knew it. He didn't want to think about what the feeling might have been like if they were moving in the other direction. What intrigued him was the fact that Anna felt it too. She had told him that her family claimed descent from the First Men, apparently through one of the old hill clans. There was more of a story there. He was going to enjoy getting it out of her. Oh, and young Robert Arryn felt it too. Not as strong, but enough for the little lordling to talk about it. It must have been the Tully blood. Jory squinted at the hills off to one side, and then nodded to himself. 3 more days until they'd see the towers of Winterfell on the far horizon. Just 3 more days until he could put down this burden of his. He looked over at the lordling, who was babbling a series of questions about the birds at one of Manderley's men, who was answering him with a tolerant smile. Yes, the boy was different. And according to Anna, he reminded her of Lord Arryn's dead nephew Albert, whom she had seen when she was herself just a girl. He sobered slightly, recalling that Lord Arryn had had a number of heirs, all of whom had died. Well, not this one. By the gods, not this one. Ned. Luwin knocked briskly at the door and then bustled in with yet another fist full of messages from the ravens. In his tower. From Bear Island and the last hearth, my lord, he muttered deferentially as he handed them over. And from the calling I heard as I was bringing these to you, more ravens are arriving. Thank you, Luwin, Ned said as he received them and then watched the man leave quickly. A small smile played around his lips as soon as the maester was gone. When he had seen the new records and the objects, Luwin had been like a small child being given a honeyed spoon to lick clean, as had Maester Aemon, who had put off his return to Castle Black to help Luwin with the work of looking at everything. The old blind maester had a deep knowledge of runes that had been a blessing. He opened the first. Mage Mormont had written it herself. The long night comes. House Mormont stands with the Stark in Winterfell. Commanda. The second had been written by an unfamiliar hand. The others come. Last hearth stands ready. He handed that one over to the Great John, who read it with pleased grunt. Small John's hand. Good, my son doesn't have cheese in his bloody ears. He looked up. Lord Stark, House Umber stands ready. And then he leant back in his chair and took a gulp of ale, before looking intently at the little mound of stone arrowheads that they had taken from the rotted bag in the secret room. Why do those fascinate you so much? Ned asked. Because they remind me of the last hearth. I used to pick up arrowheads like this as a lad when I was walking around the north walls. There's a rocky patch there, and the lower tunnels still have areas where you can mine these things as well. Most odd. Ned went still as something that the Great John had said on his arrival suddenly returned to him. Great John, you said that the last hearth was named by my ancestors, and that it was built on a crag. Did that crag have a name? The big man frowned. Aye, he said thoughtfully. 'Twas the glittering crag. Why? Ned closed his eyes for a moment and suppressed the need to swear. Because the records we found there mentioned the glittering crag and said that there had been a great siege there, that led to the others being routed. Do you know anything of that? Oh aye, the Great John said with a sigh. There was a great siege there and a lot of men died. There's a place to the south called the Burning, where the dead were said to have been cremated. And there are still barrows to the west that we were told never to disturb, not least because nothing grows on them. After the siege was broken, it was then that your ancestor gave the crag to my ancestor and told him to build a fortress there and then to guard it at all costs. Why? Ned asked intently. Why that place? At all costs. The Great John blinked at him. I don't rightly know, Ned, he replied. He then winced. We've lost a lot over the years. All I know was that every year we had to mine the lower crag for rocks to send to Winterfell. But we haven't done that for years, centuries even. He nodded in reply and then frowned at the little mound of arrowheads. Our forefathers must have thought those important. I wonder why. I don't know. Stone can be brittle. The Great John shrugged again. How are your children, by the way? Robb and John were affected as badly as we were by that bloody stone. They all heard it, so did Kat, but whereas she was frightened by it, Arya is still excited at the thought of magic. Bran wants to know more about everything. Sansa is still thinking about it all, and Rickon seems to have taken it all for granted. Ned shook his head. The young adapt better than the old. Knuckles rapped again at the door and then turned to see old Mickon standing there, twisting his cap in his hands. Your pardon, my lords. You asked me to look at the mace you found. Mickon, yes, here. And Ned pulled out the huge mace and carried it over to the blacksmith. He had to admit that he liked the way that weapon felt in his hands. It was lighter than it looked somehow and was well balanced. Someone had crafted it most skillfully after much thought. He laid it on the table that had been brought in by the door. What do you make of it? Mickon bent over and peered at it carefully, and then he blinked rapidly and took a longer look at it. Interesting, he breathed quietly as he traced a finger over it. Very interesting. Can I ask where you found this, my lord? In a hidden room. It belonged to my ancestors. Yet it is no steel that I have seen before. Mickon stroked his beard with one hand. I think, he said cautiously, that this is not steel. I think that it is sky metal. Ned looked at the Great John, who stared back in astonishment. Sky metal? Aye, I've seen a few old pieces here and there. When stars fall from the sky as rocks, then sometimes they contain metal, and sometimes that metal can be smelted and used. It often looks different. This mace, as you can see, my lord, has no corrosion on it. Not a speck of rust. He paused, as if measure his words. The make of it, the way it has been worked. It is ancient, my lord. Most ancient. This is the work of the first men. No modern mace looks like this. And, well, there were tales of magic being used on such weapons. Magic, in the forging. Mickon straightened up. He looked faintly ashamed. We have lost the means to make a weapon like this, my lord. As I look at it, the more I am convinced that magic was used to make it. I can think of no other way that it could be forged. And then he hesitated, and seemed to be struggling with something. What is it, Mickon? My lord. Every smith in Winterfell has always had tales passed down to him from his predecessor, and there is a dim and distant tale of a great mace that was in the possession of your lord ancestors, until they acquired ice. My lord, this might be the Fist of Winter. Ned looked at the mace in some shock. From the tales, he muttered. There were references there to it. He paused. Sky metal? So this is like Dawn, the sword of the Danes? Mickon shrugged. I've never seen Dawn, my lord, But sky metal varies depending on the color and nature of the star, and what can be done with it also varies. Magic again, or so the tales say. What of the stones embedded in them? Mikken scratched his beard thoughtfully. They look like nothing I have even seen, my lord. But then I am not a maester. Ned nodded and then looked at Mikken. Very well, my thanks, Mikken. Happy to oblige, my lord, the blacksmith rumbled and then strode out of the door. So that's the Fist of Winter, the Great John grunted. I've heard the legends as well. That looks like it's got a lot of weight behind it. A weight of history as well. Aye, Ned muttered as he sat again. And then he looked up at the doorway again, having heard footsteps. Luwin then emerged at the doorway puffing as if he had been running. My lord, the old maester wheezed as he approached and held out 2 pieces of paper. Messages. Taking them, Ned unrolled the first. Skagos stands with the Stark in Winterfell. This is from Skagos? It is, my lord, Luwin said. And such a thing is rare indeed. Ravens from Skagos are like hen's teeth. Ned nodded and then opened the second. House Reed stands with the Stark in Winterfell. Lord Reed rides to Winterfell with all dispatch with news of... He paused and then continued. Dreams of Greenseers. Surely that cannot be. Luwin coughed. There was a third raven, my lord. It was from the Citadel. The glass candles are relit. Magic has indeed returned to these lands. Oh bugger, Great John Umber sighed, and then he gulped down yet more ale. Brynden. He was on edge as he strode to the bloody gate, but he knew that he could not show it. The knight of the gate had to be calm and collected and not show nerves. That said, he knew that something, somewhere was very wrong. For one thing, it was far, far too quiet. Normally there was always rumbling in the hills and mountains. The mountain clans were seen moving in the high passes, raiding here, stealing there, murdering when the mood took them, and taking away women that took their fancy. They were outlaws, raiders, murderer, rapists, and overall scum. But right now they were quieter than he had ever known. Oh, there had still been reports. Something about horns being heard in the high passes, but otherwise it was as if they had vanished into thin air. It was totally unlike them, and that worried him a lot. And then there was that other thing, the thing that was also pressing upon his mind. The bloody gate loomed before him, and he made a mental note not to pass on his worries to anyone. Then he saw Sir Donal in front of him, and his heart sank a little, if for a different reason. The old veteran had that young puppy lordling behind him. The youngest son of Lord Waxley was an incompetent, wet-nosed, brainless little idiot, who had a habit of hopping from leg to leg like a small boy in need of the privy in a hurry. Well, Brynden growled. I talked to travelers on the high road. They all reported a quiet journey, not a sign of the mountain clans. I don't like it, Sir Brynden. I've never heard of such a thing. Young Waxley, who had been jiggling in place, finally opened his mouth. But sirs, the answer is obvious. The scum have finally been scared away by our great prowess and show of arms. Brynden shared a long-suffering glance with Sir Donal. Lad, Brynden rumbled, the mountain clans have been a pain in the arse of the Eyrie for centuries. I hardly think that they've been scared off by the sight of a new coat of arms on a shield. No, this is something else. But any further discussions was curtailed by the sound of a shout from the gate itself, as a sentry at the tallest part waved at them. Sir Brynden, riders before the gate, mountain clans. I knew it, Brynden sighed, and then strode off quickly towards the gates, which were already being pulled closed by the men. They were good lads. He had trained them well. As the gates boomed closed, he entered the side gate to one of the towers, followed by Sir Donal and the Waxley pup, and then ran up the spiral stairs. As they emerged from the door on the ramparts, he looked out at the road. Yes, they were there. A group of figures on those small horses of theirs. Well, all but one was mounted. The one that was not seemed to be too large for a horse. Yes, they were mountain clansmen. 10 of them to be precise. And they were all just sitting there, on their horses, not doing a damn thing, out of range of any bowman. Sitting there with the mist roiling down the valley towards them. This is odd, Sir Donal muttered. What are they doing? And then one of them, who was holding a spear, got off his horse and started to walk towards the bloody gate. Halfway there he jammed the butt of the spear into the earth on the side of the road, and then took 10 measured paces, and then stopped walking. This got the Waxley pup spluttering. He challenges us. What impudence. Sir Brynden, I can get the rogue from here with my bow. No, Brynden said with a frown. That is not a challenge. That is a parley. I will treat with him. And then he turned and went swiftly down the stairs to the gates, before borrowing a spear from one of the men-at-arms, and then slipping through a small postern gate. Once out he walked along the road, counting, until he reached the spot he had measured with his eyes from the ramparts. There he thrust the butt of his own spear in the ground and then marched 10 paces forwards, taking off his wrist bracers as he did, and then pulling up the chainmail and leather on the forearm of his sleeve. The clansman, who was as grey as he was and dressed in the usual mismatched armor of the mountain clans, was also busy rolling back his sleeve. When he was done he nodded at Brynden and then strode forwards and clasped forearms with him, skin to skin. No hidden arms, said the clansman. No hidden arms, Brynden agreed, before they both stepped back and replaced their sleeves. You are the Blackfish, the clansman said almost cheerily. It would be an honor to kill you. I am Rhys, son of Daenor. I am the Blackfish, and you are the head of the Sons of the Tree, Brynden said, feeling intrigued. What was he doing here? They normally ranged far to the northwest. I am that. The clansman stuck his thumbs in his belt and then looked at Brynden somberly. We come here to bear witness, to warn you. Your clan? Rhys sighed and then jerked a thumb at the group behind him. All the clans, we lead them. Ice seemed to trickle up and down his spine for an instant. All the clans? They were all there? He peered at them. The large man had 2 axes strapped to his back and another at his belt. He seemed to like axes, and one seemed to be a woman. Yes, they could well be the leaders of the mountain clans. To warn us about what? Why, that we shall return, that in our absence you shall not think that you have won the long war, or that you send men to drive out those that shall remain to guard our lands. Brynden ran his words through his head, wondered if he had gone mad, and then asked the one question that the situation demanded. What? Rhys ran a hand through his beard and sighed. When he looked up, Brynden recognized the look in the eyes of the man. It was the look of a man who thought that he might die at some point. We are summoned, he said almost gently. We have all felt the call. The old blood is strong in us, and we heed what it tells us. So we come here with a summons and a warning. The summons is for us. We are needed in the north. The warning is for you. We will return. And when we do, the Age of Heroes will return and we will have it all back. Blackfish, tell the Aaron we will have it all again. It will be our payment. Payment? And what do you mean you are going to the north? Why? This bought him a pitying look. Ah, you have rocks in your ears. You did not hear it. Rhys smiled a strange and terrible smile. The others have returned, Blackfish. We have heard the call. Shock roiled through him. What call is this? Rhys looked at him. It came days ago. The others come. The Stark. Brynden Tully interrupted him. The Stark calls for aid. You are needed. The clansman opened his eyes at that, and then he smiled hugely. Saha! So, the old blood is strong in you too, Blackfish. You have heard the call as well. Your ancestors must have been mighty indeed. Perhaps we will fight together on the wall. The smile faded. Many of us will die, but it will be a good death. Many new songs will be sung about us, but it will be worth it. We remember, you see. We remember, he said the words with a curious intensity. 'Tis a curse and a blessing. This was madness, but he remembered the voice he had heard, remembered the feeling that it had sparked within him. He swallowed thickly. But the others have been gone for thousands of years. A shrug from the clansman. Seasons turn. Winter is coming. The long night returns, and with it the dreams. In the stars the bottom of the crook can be seen for the first time in memory, as it was foretold. They come, Blackfish. They come, we march. But tell the Aaron that we will be back. And then he turned and strode off, wrenching the spear out of the ground as he left. Brynden took a step towards him. Wait, you go north? How? Rhys waved a hand over his shoulder as he walked away. Secret ways, Blackfish, he called over his shoulder. Secret ways. And then the mist rolled in and he was gone. Jorah. He liked Myr, even though it was too hot for his blood. Everywhere in Essos was too hot. He was of the north, of Bear Island, and as he lay in bed and stared at the ceiling, he thought of home for a long moment, before closing his eyes in anguish for a moment. The thought of the trees and the steep hills, the little villages on the coastline, the fog that wreathed the island. He thrust the memories away before they could choke him with grief, yet again, and then slipped out of bed, leaving the girl sleeping on her side of it. What was her name again? Oh yes, Lyra. A sweet girl with a warm smile and a liking for him. given by the number of times she was available for him. He smiled at her slumbering form for a moment, and then walked quietly to the chair and threw on a robe, before crossing to the window. Mir, the city that people, men and women, never really slept. There was always something being made somewhere, or planned, or even thought up and then discussed very, very loudly. He often wondered if the citadel at Old Town was like this place. Possibly it was Louster when inspiration struck. He grabbed a chair from one side, and then carefully placed it so the noise did not wake Lyra, before sitting in it and then running his hands through his hair. The letter from Varys had been clear. He was to go to Pentos and spy on the beggar king there. Pentos. He loathed that place. In Mir there were at least ideas and a slightly frenetic optimism. Pentos? It was riddled with cynicism and ruthless ambition. Trade was everything, and anything could be traded there. But why was the beggar king there? For what purpose? Apparently he and his sister were in the house of one of the magisters of the city, one Illyrio Mapatis. He'd asked about the man. He was extremely rich and powerful, and apparently wasn't a man who liked fools. So why take in the beggar king? Viserys Targaryen was penniless, proud, desperate, and increasingly unstable. Given who his father had been, the instability wasn't that surprising. In his case, the apple had not only not fallen far from the tree, but had nestled against the trunk. No, Varys was right. Something was indeed going on there. So he would have to leave Mer and travel north, to that city filled with men with deep pockets and naught but greed in their eyes. His own eyes flickered to the northwest. The pull of home was strong today. It grew stronger with every day that passed now, ever since the night that he'd come awake with a shout, startling Lyra. It had been an intense dream. That voice. He felt the call of home, and yet home was denied him. He ran a hand over his chin and resolved to shave that day. He preferred to be clean-shaven here. Beards could be too sweaty, otherwise. He thought of his father, and the old man's great beard, and then smiled slightly before the smile ebbed. Home. Jorah. He turned to the bed and smiled in reassurance. Lyra was looking at him sleepily, hair tousled and one breast exposed. I did not want to disturb you, he said softly. 'Tis morning. She smiled at him and then pulled the sheet down to show the other breast. Come back to bed. He smiled back and then obeyed her command. Pentos awaited. Perhaps she would come with him, but the north still called. Asha. There was a dead man in the gibbet on the end of the breakwater at Lordsport. Asha stared at the corpse as the black wind passed it. Whoever he was, he had not died well. His arms were bound behind him, and what appeared to be wooden stakes had been hammered into his eyes. He hadn't been there when they'd left, and her men did not like the way this greeted them on their return. Many turned their heads and spat to ward off evil. As they made the ship fast to the pier, Hyken nudged her. Look yonder. She looked and then blinked. She knew that ship, and that flag. The sea song, she breathed, and then as soon as the ship was moored properly, she leapt over the side. Feed the men. I have to see my nuncle. She called over her shoulder and then acknowledged Halen's wave of acknowledgement with one of her own. She had to admit that she was troubled as she strode over the stone quay and over to her Uncle Roderick's ship. Perhaps he would have sound counsel for her, but he was not there. Instead, his sailing master Dale was standing by the gangplank, one hand on his sword and a deeply worried look on his face. He brightened when he saw her though, enough to crack a smile and joke about her hair. But then he stared at the castle. Your nuncle has gone to see your father, he said grimly. And Lord Harlaw is, well, troubled. Asha nodded, and then she noticed the air of tension about the crew. The sea song looked as if it was ready to sail at a moment's notice. Dale, what is wrong? But the man had never been a very eloquent or talkative man, and all she got from him was some hemming and hawing, before an entreaty to go to the castle and see if Lord Harlaw was all right, that he had been gone for too long. And so Asha finally nodded and left for Pike. The wind was blowing hard by the time she made it into the tower where her father's solar was situated, and she stopped to sniff it. There was more rain in that wind, and it was veering to the southeast again. There might be a storm on the way. She shrugged and then opened the door and strode down the corridor. And then she heard the voices. The guards outside the solar looked nervous, and on edge, and when she identified the voices she knew why. Uncle Roderick and father were both in there, as was Uncle Aaron. Dampier himself was in there and she shuddered a little. He had been a very different man since his near drowning, colder than the sea and as devout as any drowned man could ever be, and sometimes even more so. The guards saw her and nodded at her as she reached for the door, only to have it opened in front of her. Uncle Roderick stormed out and very nearly collided with her, changing course at the last moment. He looked as angry as she had ever seen him, and beneath that anger was worry. His eyes widened as he realized who he had nearly knocked over, and then he strode away down the corridor, although not before whispering, "I sail on the tide. See me before." She watched him go with a frown of puzzlement, and then she turned back to the solar, only to see Danfair stride out. He looked at her, narrowed his eyes slightly, and then left down a different corridor, and she stared after him. There had been something about him that set her teeth on edge. There had been a set to his shoulders and a glitter in his eyes, almost amounting to a look of ecstasy, that worried him. Father was staring out of the window of his solar and only looked around when she closed the door. He looked preoccupied with a scowl on his face. "Asha," he said eventually, "you are back early." "I had to return," she said. "I felt—" Father forestalled her by scowling even more and holding up a hand. "Speak not of it. It was Greenlander mummery." Asha stared at her father in astonishment. "Father, we were at sea. Half my crew heard it, and the other half felt it, or felt something at least." "Speak of it not," Father roared at her, and she took a step back before Father rubbed at his forehead and then waved a hand in a semi-apology. "I have had your Uncle Roderick in there from an early hour." The reader spoke nonsense. "I fear he is addled in his head. Anyway, Aaron was here, and he explained everything. 'Twas not but a Greenlander mummery, as the drowned god denied this call to the north. We are to pay it no mind." Asha opened her mouth to passionately argue against this, but then she caught the fire in Father's eye. Now was not the time. Not with his memories so fresh with Uncle Roderick's sanity and Uncle Aaron's madness. No, she had a good idea about what was going on here. So she nodded sharply and then passed back out through the castle, noting absently that the storm was indeed building, but that it might pass to the west, and then down to Lordsport, where she found her sane uncle pacing about on the quay by his ship. "Asha," he greeted her. "Let me guess, your father claimed mummery of some type." "He did. But I heard it, Nuncle. I heard it as clear as I hear you. The others come. The Stark in Winterfell needs us." She shook her head, bewildered. "How can Father deny it? My own crew feel it." "I know, little one," he said, another sign that he was very worried. "I know. It was strong at Harlaw. But your father—" Uncle Roderick looked about carefully, and then lowered his voice. "Your Lord Father hates the North and the Starks for their role in the suppression of his rebellion, for the death of your brothers. To admit that he has felt the call to aid them, he cannot do that, even if the threat is from the others. He simply claims that the others are no threat to the Ironborn, even if the others even still exist and are not some tale told by old women in the North." His face set slightly. "And then there is your Uncle Aaron. Danfair will never admit to hearing that call. Never. To do so means admitting to the existence of the old gods, and to acknowledging that we are linked to the first men. Drowned men claim that we were made by the drowned god. To your father and your uncle, admitting that they heard the call to the north to aid the Stark means that the old way is weakened, and that is something that they cannot abide." Asha thought it through and then sighed. "So what shall we do? We watch and we wait, and we keep our mouths shut." Uncle Roderick gestured at the breakwater. "Do you see that man out there?" "Aye. He traded with the North a lot. He heard the call and talked about the old gods in earshot of Danfair. So your uncle had him bound and then hammered stakes whittled from weirwood driftwood into his eyes until he died. Danfair will deny everything and kill anyone who contradicts him. So I will sail back to Harlaw, and I will read my books, and do my research, and protect my people, because foul things are coming from the north. Asha, winter comes. And with it, death. Don't be on pike when it comes, niece, because the drowned god—" He paused for a long moment, and then sighed. "The call to Winterfell is louder." Oberyn. The water gardens were still as lovely as they had ever been, he thought, as he strolled down the little path. There were flowering herb bushes to each side of him, and as he passed down the path, he could hear the contented buzzing from the bees as they harvested the pollen around them. As he walked, he thought, and as he thought, he did his best not to frown too much. Life was always a series of challenges and tests, although the past few days had been confusing. He had always had an ear for gossip and news and other things, but recently, it had been odd, even by his definition of the word. He found his brother sitting quietly in his wheeled chair, overlooking the most beautiful part of the water gardens. "My prince," he said formally, before nodding at him. "How are you today, brother?" Doran smiled slightly. "Tolerable," he said quietly, which was as good as he ever admitted. "And you, Oberyn?" He sat on a nearby bench and clasped his hands for a moment as he thought through everything in his head. "Brother," Doran broke in, "you are troubled. I can see it." "What is wrong?" Oberyn winced a little. "Nothing I can put my finger on, brother. Just oddness. There have been a few ravens with peculiar messages. Activity in the Citadel at Old Town, Robert Baratheon vanishing from King's Landing, and," he sighed a little, "apparently the Company of the Rose is acting oddly in Braavos." "The Sellsword Company?" Doran asked with a frown. "Oddly how?" He leant back on the bench and scowled slightly. "Apparently they turned down a major contract to fight some lunatic bandits that were bothering some Braavosi merchants, and apparently they have been negotiating with shipping factors about a trip westwards. I have not heard where to exactly yet, but I am concerned." Doran looked at him. "Odd activity amongst sellswords. Does this threaten our enterprise?" He thought about it for a long moment. "It might. Sellswords will be needed at some point, and I like sellswords to be predictable. When they are not, well, I will find out more." Doran nodded slowly as he looked out at the sea in the distance. "And this news of Baratheon vanishing is also odd," he went to Storm's End. "There is no word yet on why." Another nod. A moment of silence fell as they both stared into the distance. And then Oberyn looked to one side as he heard the thump of boots. Ariohutta was striding towards them, a slight frown on his face. He stopped not too far away and bowed formally. "My prince," he said quietly to Doran, "Prince Oberyn, I crave your pardon, but an unannounced visitor asks for an urgent meeting." He saw his brother sigh tiredly. He did not like people to see him in his wheelchair. The Prince of Dorne wanted to be in his palace in Sunspear, not being an invalid in the Water Gardens. "Who is it, Hota?" The big man coughed slightly. "Lord Alster Dane, my prince." Oberyn exchanged a startled look with his brother. "I thought that he was supposed to be dying at Starfall." "It would seem that he has roused himself from his deathbed, brother," Doran said, looking fascinated. "He would not have come unless it was for a very good reason." "Very well, Hota. Let him through." The captain of the guard bowed and then swept away, before returning with a smaller man dressed in riding garb that looked as if it had taken a lot of usage recently. He bowed to them both and then swayed slightly. "Lord Dane, be seated," Doran said, leaning forward slightly in concern. Oberyn cast an eye over the man. He did not look well, with a face that was drawn and pale from more than just travel. His eyes seemed a little sunken, and there was a look to him that told of weariness beyond words. "Thank you, my prince," Lord Dane said hoarsely, and Oberyn reached to one side and poured a cup of wine for the man from the table to one side. "And thank you, Prince Oberyn," he muttered, and drank without hesitation. Oberyn smirked slightly and sighed. Normally he would say that it was a brave man who took anything to eat or drink from the Red Viper of Dorne. In this case caution was not needed. Once the Lord of Starfall had finished drinking, he lowered the cup and smiled. "My apologies for me attire. I have been traveling in a hurry, and will leave for Sunstone as soon as possible, but I had to see you first." "For what reason?" Doran asked the question with a slight frown on his face. Lord Dane's face worked for a moment, and then he sighed. "I am called North, my prince. It is hard to explain." Doran's frown intensified. "You are called North? Where? Have you been summoned to King's Landing?" "No," Dane sighed. "I am not. I am called further north than that, but it is very hard to explain, my prince. It is something that the stony Dornish understand and are dealing with, without I think understand it, because they do not remember." He swayed slightly and Oberyn watched him in concern. But then Lord Alster Dane collected himself, took a deep breath, and then looked up, and Oberyn saw something in those violet eyes that made him blink. There was an iron determination there, and a need to be somewhere else. "Your pardon, my prince. I have not been well of late. But then, my prince, House Dane is one of the oldest families in Dorne. We are of the first men. Their blood sings within us. And echoes, older times. One such echo has awoken. As the head of House Dane I am called to the north, to Winterfell." To Oberyn this was pure gibberish, and he looked at the other men in some concern. "Lord Dane," he said, with a sideways glance at his frowning brother, "have you seen a maester of late?" Dane smiled mirthlessly. "I am quite sane, Prince Oberyn. It is just that, you are familiar with the ancestral sword of my house, Don." He thought back to the last time he had seen the sword, born in the hands of Arthur Dane, the last sword of the morning that House Dane had produced. Dead now these many years, killed by Ned Stark. He had always admired that sword. It had a sheen that was unlike anything he had ever seen. "I remember it," he said. "What of it?" "It is restless." Dane said the last word with a strange intensity. "It pulls me north, and I must go. I am not a well man. This might be my last trip, but north I must go. I will send word to King's Landing, where my—" He paused for a moment to drink some more wine. "My son Edric is, telling him to join me at Winterfell." There was a long moment of silence. Then Oberyn looked at his brother, before turning back to Dane. "Lord Dane," he said delicately, "swords are not usually described as being restless." The stony Dornishman nodded. "I know, Prince Oberyn. As I said, it is hard to understand. Perhaps if you observed it, I left it with your captain. If he could bring it forwards." This was something else that made Oberyn blink. "I thought that Dawn was to remain at Starfall until another sword of the morning was selected? This is too urgent. It cannot wait for that." Dane said the words grimly. "It travels north with me. Its pull takes me north." Oberyn looked over at his brother and was about to ask him to send this dying lunatic man away, when he saw a look on Doran's face that made him pause. "What, brother?" "Something our father once told us, and which I will tell you later," Doran muttered, before raising his voice. "Very well. Hata, my prince? Bring Dawn to us." The big man nodded and then walked off to one side. When he returned into view, he looked troubled. He was also carrying a great sword in a sheath bound with red leather. Oberyn nodded slightly as he looked at the hilt and the odd sheen. Yes, that was Dawn. Hota approached and then knelt before them. He seemed to be sweating a little. "Dawn, my prince," he said hoarsely. "Prince Oberyn," Lord Dane said quietly, "please touch the hilt." Oberyn almost rolled his eyes at this, but he was still wondering why Hata looked as if he had seen a ghost, and he squinted carefully at the hilt. Nothing looked suspicious there before touching it with a languid hand. And then he leapt to his feet with a stifled oath. "By the seven, it's quivering." "Yes, Prince Oberyn," Hota said in a voice that said that he wanted to drop the damn thing and then have no more of it. "It is." Doran rubbed his chin for a moment and then reached out a single finger, which he placed on the hilt. When he lifted it again, he was pale. "Indeed it does." He looked back at Dane. "Do you know what calls you north?" Dane looked at him. "I do," he said in a grim voice. "I do not think that I will ever return, save to the crypt at Starfall, and even now I do not think that you would ever believe me when I say what is there. But there are dark things in the north, things that the south must be protected from, and so I go, back to my kin in the north." The Lord of Starfall stood slowly and then looked about the water gardens. "A very beautiful place in the sun," he smiled. And then the smile faded. "Farewell, my prince." He gently took the sword out of the hands of Hota, who sighed in relief, and then Lord Dane walked away tiredly. "Brother," Doran said slowly, "can you please send a raven to the citadel? To ask if the glass candles can be lit. I will send that raven at once." And then Oberyn ran. "Robert." There was a storm coming. There was always a bloody storm coming. That was why his ancestors had named the fucking place Storm's End. He looked out over the ramparts of the massive curtain wall at the horizon, before looking back at the great tower with a scowl. He hadn't the faintest bloody idea why he was here, in this, the seat of his ancestors. All he knew was that he'd woken up in the middle of the night, with a sudden need to head off to his family seat. And on the sea journey south, that call had gotten worse and had then been joined by another call, this time to go off in the opposite direction. He turned back to the sea and scowled again. What the hell was wrong with him? Why was he dithering around like an old woman? What was here to make him come in the first place? He didn't know. The first day had been bad enough. He and Renly had burst in on an astonished Sir Courtenay Penrose, the castellan that his brother had appointed, and whom Robert had to admit wasn't doing a bad job. Robert had spent just long enough to bath and break his fast, before raging around the castle, inspecting it with his brother and Barristan Selmy right behind him, both a bit bewildered. He knew that he was looking for something, The problem was that he hadn't the faintest bloody idea what it was, where it was, or how to find it. He just knew that it was here somewhere. The second day was worse, as he continued to rage around the castle, with many people doing their damnedest to avoid him, even young Edric, who he had noticed peering around walls trying to catch a look at his father. He liked the boy, but he had no time for him just now. No time for anything. He had to work out why he was here. And now it was the third day and he was still nowhere near working out why he was fucking here. He scratched at his beard again and then frowned. Sawed the beard. He needed to get it shaved off completely. And then he looked at his belly in disgust. He was fat. When had he gotten fat? How had he gotten fat? Was it all that bloody city and that damn chair? He set his chin. Right then. A shave and then a sparring session. With who? He needed to lose this damn fat. So he turned and clattered down the nearest steps off the wall and down to the green of the grassy expanse that lay to the west of the great tower. And then he paused and frowned. There was a little sapling growing out of the grass, its leaves poking up tentatively into the sky. Robert walked up to it and then bent over to look at it. By the seven, it was a weirwood tree. He looked about the place. What the hell was a weirwood tree doing growing here? And then he thought about it. His ancestor Durin had built this place. Possibly with the help of Bran the Builder. So there must have been a godswood here once. Hundreds of bloody years ago. Where the hell had this thing come from? Your Grace? Selmy asked behind him and he pointed at the delicate little thing. A weirwood sapling, he muttered. I don't remember ever seeing any of those before. The Lord Commander of the Kingsguard looked over at it. Perhaps it came from a seed dropped by a bird. Weirwood trees have small seeds. Perhaps, Robert mused. The little sapling reminded him of the north and of Lyanna. There were times when he could barely remember what she looked like, and he made a vow to visit her grave soon. There would be a statue of her by it, a reminder of what she looked like. She wouldn't have let him get fat, not his she-wolf. Oh, said a fussy voice to one side, and he looked up to see the Septon, a thin streak of piss whose name escaped him, bustling up to them and sneering at the sapling. Another one of those things. If your grace will allow me, I shall remove it. As he reached down, Robert placed a large hand on his arm. Wait, you said it was another one? There have been more of these? The Septon blinked at him. Why, yes, your grace. There have been several of them. They started growing about 10 days ago. Robert looked down at the sapling. That was about the time that he had left King's Landing. Odd, he growled before looking at the Septon. Leave it. 'Tis but a tree. This seemed to aggrieve the Septon, given the violence of the gabbling that followed. But your grace, it's a pagan symbol. The seven will frown on the presence of such a thing here. Then why, Robert said through gritted teeth, do the seven still permit weirwood trees in the north? The Septon seemed to do his best to look censorious. It was not a good look for a man who appeared to have no chin and a very large nose. The pagans of the north, your grace, he started to say, are uncouth and, given that the tale of how Robert had gained the throne must have been told in Storm's End more times than he'd had whores, the man must have been mad. Robert grabbed by his robes and hoisted him into the air. Why, beloved Lyanna came from the north. You little piece of filth. Robert roared at the man as he shook him like a rat. And my friend Ned is the warden of the north, and the finest man I've ever known. Uncouth. I'll uncouth you right in the face, you bastard. The Septon was squealing what appeared to be a combination of apology, cry for help, and appeal to the seven, and Robert glared at him, before giving him one last shake and then dropping him on his arse, away from the sapling. The man cowered before him, before noticing that they had an audience, whereupon he shakily stood. Robert loomed over him and narrowed his eyes. If anything happens to that weirwood plantling, he ground out, I will know exactly who to blame, you, and I will personally spread your nose clean over your face. Now bugger off. Visibly glad to still be alive, the Septon gave a ghastly attempt at a grin, and then vanished like the little fart that he was. Robert watched him go and then stomped off back to the Great Keep, where he had that shave. And then, once his face was bare, he waved a hand at Renly. Come on, grab some practice swords. I worry that all that time in the Reach is making you soft. Robert, his youngest brother said with a laugh. I joust. I know, but I worry that you forget that real war consists of men on foot clattering away at each other until one falls over and leaks his guts out. So, we will spar, and spar they did. Renly wasn't as bad as he had feared, but not as good as he obviously thought he was, and Robert beat him down twice before finally breaking his practice sword. "You're getting soft," Robert panted as he stood over his brother, and then offered him his hand. "Robert," Renly replied as he pulled himself up. "What's going on? Why are we here? What are we looking for? And what's this talk of war? You can't feel it then?" "Feel what?" Robert clenched and unclenched his hand. "I don't know, and that holds for all your questions. Something pulled me here, Renly. I don't know what, and there is a war coming. I can feel it on my blood and in my bones. I just don't know who we'll be fighting." "You really don't feel it?" Renly frowned and then pulled a face. "I have felt restless this past 10 days, as if I need to look over my shoulder." Then he paused and nodded slightly. "We have an audience." He turned to look and then saw young Edric watching them, his mouth open with wonder. He was carrying a little warhammer. He smiled slightly, and then beckoned his bastard son over. "Come here and let me have a look at that boy." Edric approached, looking nervous. "I am sorry, Your Grace, but I saw you practicing and You were curious, lad. Don't worry, it's in your blood." He reached out and gently took up the little warhammer. "A good first weapon. Penrose training you with it." The boy nodded eagerly. "Sir Courtenay has been instructing me with it, Your Grace." "I'm your father, lad. You can call me that instead of all this Your Grace stuff," Robert rumbled, before handing it back. "Come on then. Let's see you use it." And the boy did know how to use it. He had the makings of good warrior, blessed with good reflexes, and a quick mind. He learnt fast, picking up Robert's barked instructions and warnings, and not having his head turned by any praise. They ended the session when Edric was dropping with exhaustion, as Robert nodded at Sir Courtenay as the yawning lad was led away by a smiling guard. "You've done well," he smiled. "He's a good lad." "He is that, Your Grace," the red-bearded man said with a smile. "He's clever and knows when to ask questions and when to stop and listen." "Looks like me too," he said with a grin, and then he paused as his stomach rumbled. "Supper calls. Ale, too." He ate just enough and drank just enough that evening, because all of a sudden he was so tired that he almost fell asleep in his chair. It was a good tiredness, a tiredness in every limb that came from exercise, and he fell into bed and was asleep in an instant. The storm came that night, the kind of storm he remembered from his childhood. But the dreams had him first, the dreams that this time he remembered. He dreamt of Lyanna for the first time in years, and this time she was just as he remembered her. She seemed to be trying to tell him something, shouting against a great wind that seemed to snatch her words away. She looked terrified, as if she was pleading him for something, but he couldn't get close to make her words out. There were weirwood trees there too, at first far behind them, but then suddenly they rushed towards them and then they were in them, the trunks around them. He lost her then, as if she had been snatched away, and he screamed with frustration and ran through the ghostly wood around him. There was snow on the ground all of a sudden, and his breath smoked as he panted, and then he entered a clearing, and a thing with white hair and bright blue eyes that shone like stars stared at him, with some surprise. He came awake with a shout and then blinked muzzily about him, and then there was a boom of thunder right above him, and the room shook slightly. Yes, the storm had come. He lay back in bed, his chest heaving as he panted. What had that dream been about? What had she been trying to tell him? And what had been that thing? More thunder, and then a strange, irrational feeling came over him. Suddenly he was terrified for that little weirwood sapling. There was thunder and lightning and torrential rain outside, and would it survive? So he stood and dressed hurriedly before darting out of his room and then out into the night. The rain was falling hard, and yet more lightning cracked across the sky, followed by the boom of thunder. He hurried across the wet grass, and then he saw the other figure, the one cloaked and hooded from the rain and also heading towards the sapling. He eyed the figure, and then he sped up. There was a horrible intent in the way that figure was stalking. He was right. The figure ahead was peering at the ground, and then it stopped dead and tilted its head at something, before raising a foot. But Robert hurled himself forwards before the other man could get a chance to stamp on the sapling, grabbing the bastard and pulling him off to one side. The other man let out a shout of shock, and Robert snarled in fury as he recognized the voice. Sure enough, the hood fell down to reveal the Septon, who snarled at him, and then recognized him, and by the smell of it pissed himself in terror. Robert's fist came back and down, and he felt the Septon's nose break with a wet crack as he smeared it across the other man's face. Blood spurted all over the place, and then as the other man squealed in anguish, Robert brought his bloodied fist around again and caught him on the side of the head, knocking him senseless. "You leave Lyanna's fucking tree alone," Robert screamed as the thunder boomed around them, in what he later admitted to himself was a deeply nonsensical statement. And then he straightened up and searched the ground carefully. The last thing he wanted was to step on the thing. No, there it was, still upright. A bit bloody perhaps from the Septon's nose, but intact, and none the worse from the weather. He nodded and then knelt by it, before touching the little leaves gently. It was dark down here. No, black. Pitch black. Water was falling somewhere, dripping slowly down. Where was he? Underground. Yes. And he was being watched. Who was there, in that darkness? That deep, smothering darkness. He quivered. It was here. What he sought was here and— "Your Grace, are you well?" He looked up, startled. The rain was slowing and the Septon was stirring. Barristan Selmy was next to him, looking worried. "Selmy, what's wrong?" "I should say the same thing to you, Your Grace." You were motionless. What happened? He could see Renly approaching and also Penrose and young Edric, the latter yawning as if he was about to fall asleep in an instant again. Robert looked down at the Septon. "I woke up, odd dreams," he said thickly. "I was worried for some reason, came out and found this bastard about to stamp on the weirwood tree. He was probably going to blame it on the storm. I got to him first and then swatted him. Penrose, get some guards to throw him in the nearest cell. Septon or not, I want him gone." "I never liked him," Renly muttered. "Man always thought that the way to piety was to point out everyone else's flaws." They all watched as the guards arrived and dragged the suddenly awake and piteously squealing man away. "Something happened when I touched the weirwood tree," Robert said slowly. "I was underground suddenly." Young Edric's head whipped around as his son stared at him, his face very white. Robert looked back at him. "Edric," he said seriously, "has that happened to you too?" His bastard son nodded slowly. "The first time I saw it, I touched the leaf and I was somewhere dark. There was water dripping, and I did not imagine it, I swear, but I thought that I was being watched." He smiled. Yes, this lad was his son. Then he paused. "Penrose, bring me maps, plans, everything you have on the catacombs of Storm's End. I have been searching for something. I think that it lies not up here but beneath us." An hour later, if he had thought that he had known every inch of the tunnels beneath Storm's End before, he knew even more now. And there was indeed a tunnel that led in the direction of where the old God's Wood must have been, the long passage. But there was a problem. "There's nothing bloody down here," he said disgustedly, as he and Renly stood at the end of it and stared at a stone wall. "Although I remember a lot of crates of old pickled herring here once, when I hid as a child. Plus there are a lot fewer rats." "We ate most of them," Renly muttered quietly. "Robert, during the siege Stannis had the entire castle searched from end to end for food. He found nothing down here." "Aye, but what's the point of the long passage anyway? It doesn't lead anywhere. There are no side passages or bricked-up entrances to rooms. What was it for?" This brought him a shrug from his brother. "Who knows? Perhaps it was stopped before it was completed." "No, there's something down here. I know it." Footsteps sound behind them, and they turned to see Edric and Penrose coming towards them, the latter counting under his breath. When they reached them, the Castellan looked at them both, his eyes shining. "Your Grace, I have pasted out. The end of this passage is not under the place where the tree grows. It is short of it by at least 60 feet. "I was right," Robert cried, exulted. "There is something down here." He turned to the wall. "It must be behind here." "Your Grace," Edric piped up to one side. "The walls to each side are laid stone on stone. The wall at the end is laid stone on mortar on stone. They are similar stones but different build." He squinted at the wall. "Well spotted, lad," he said, and ruffled the boy's hair affectionately. "Need a knife? Let's take a look." "Edric's right," Renly mused, as he pulled a knife out, and poked at the mortar. "And shoddy mortar at that. This was built in a hurry." "Then it can be demolished in a hurry," Robert muttered as he grabbed a knife proffered by Penrose and started to scrape the mortar away. Although the Castellan offered to get men to do this, Robert and his brother, the latter now at last filled with excitement, shrugged off the offer of help and instead worked on breaking down the wall, as the mortar was removed and young Edric was also helping. The chance came for Robert to get a grip on one stone and pull as hard as he could. Fat or not, he still had some strength. He could feel the sinews strain and the muscles burn, But the first stone came out of the wall with a screeching groan and he tossed it to one side. And where that stone had been was a void, black as night. "Wait, Your Grace," Selmy said urgently behind them. "Test the air first with a torch. It might be foul." That was good counsel, and he nodded at the old Kingsguard respectfully before placing the proffered torch near the hole. It dipped and flickered for a moment, and he nodded. "Let's clear the rest of this thing carefully." Stone by stone. Men were called and he and Renly worked at taking the wall down and handing each stone back so that they could be passed back down the corridor. By the time they were finished, the wall was gone, and in its place was the continuation of the corridor, albeit covered in dust. Robert swallowed as he took a tentative step into it. Who knew who had last walked down there? Not he, nor any man alive. He would wager good coin on that. And then his eyes widened as he saw that the passageway ended in a great stone door, with a massive lintel over the top, etched with runes. "Those are the runes of the first men," he breathed, as he looked at them. "Fetch Maester Jern." Maester Jern was, it turned out, not far away, as he had just awoken and was afire with curiosity at the new discovery. The man arrived almost at a dead run, and then stared up at the runes, his hands shaking as he held his torch up and traced the shapes out. When he was finished he stepped back, white as a sheet. "Well?" Robert barked. "What do they say?" "Your Grace," the older man quavered, before he rallied. "Your Grace, your ancestors lie within. The inscription reads, 'House Durrandon sleeps here, awaiting the call to fight the long night.'" Robert looked at the stone door for a long moment, and then he walked up to it, and with a trembling hand of his own he pushed at the right-hand side of it. It resisted him at first, and then he felt it give a little. So he pushed harder. Whoever had built it had done a bloody good job, because it pivoted slowly on the left-hand side. Once it was open, he retreated back into the corridor, and then waved his torch at the entrance. Nothing happened to the flames, so he shrugged and then walked in slowly. It was a great room, with a stone ceiling supported by great pillars cut from the living rock. He frowned at that and then stared at the walls. Sheer rock as well. "What is this place? How old is this place?" he muttered. "Robert," said a stunned Renly to one side. "Look." And then he saw the tombs. They were everywhere, cut into the sides of the walls with inscriptions saying who they were. Some in stone coffins that marched in lines parallel to the walls, and some even buried in slots cut in the floor. "I always wondered where the Durrandons were buried," he breathed, as he looked about. Then he frowned. But why were they hidden? "Edric, stay back," Penrose called out, but as Robert looked he could see that the boy was walking forwards anyway. From the light of the torch he carried he could see that Edric's face was blank of all thought. He passed down the line of tombs and then stood before an alcove that lay at the far end, dark and mysterious. When the lad reached the alcove he turned and faced him. "Father," he said in a strange voice, as if others were speaking through him. "It is here. This is the place you seek. The old gods are strong here. The dead have not forgotten them." And then he quietly folded up and collapsed. He darted forwards at the same time as Penrose and Renly, but being closer, he got there first. His son was unhurt, but seemed to be asleep, and he passed him gently to the castellan. "Get my son to bed," he told the man quietly. "He has had a long day already." And then he turned to the alcove. Silence fell after Penrose's feet had passed away, and he could hear the sound of water dripping somewhere. He shivered slightly. Yes, this was the place. He walked forward slowly, Renly by him, and as they approached he could see the alcove better by their torchlight. There was a statue there, a man dressed in archaic armor with a huge greatsword or archaic design in his hands. More runes were carved into the wall by the statue. "Jern!" The Meister stumbled forwards, tongue-tied by everything around him, and then he stopped and stared at the inscription. Oh, Your Grace. It says, 'The long night will come again. The Durrandons must always stand against it. Ours is the fury, ours is the storm, because the others will come again.' The house motto," Robert muttered. "Ours in the fury. So this is where it comes from." And then he paused. The statue and the sword seemed to be different. "But the others are a northern myth," Renly objected, although his voice wobbled up and down more than a bit. "Are you sure about that, brother?" Robert muttered. And then he passed his torch over. "Here, hold this." "Why?" "That sword. It's that sword." He stepped forwards and then laid a reverent hand on the hilt, where it met the hands of the statue. As he pulled it, it moved, and he placed both hands around the grip, and then he felt a tremor run through him. And then the eyes of the statue seemed to open to reveal orbs of red fire, before a voice seemed to roar in his head. Storm King! He shook like a leaf but retained his grip. He sensed Renly stumbling backwards and Selmy letting out a cry of alarm and then darting forwards. Hold, he said thickly. I am Robert, descendant of the Durandons. I am king. The eyes looked at him. Then go north, Storm King. Go north. The eyes closed. The sword fell into his hands and then he found himself falling backwards, to be caught by Jern and Birastan Selmy. Bugger me, Robert said, and then he passed out. Alara! She found him on the great rock at the anvil, the northernmost point of the island. Her husband was staring north at the sea with an odd look on his face, the look of man undecided and uncertain. She ran a hand over her swollen stomach. She knew what kept him here, just as she also knew what was pulling him north. Things that she did not understand were in motion, and she wanted to cry for a moment. Why couldn't things be as they had been? Why did the world have to be the way that it was? But then she calmed herself and took a deep breath. Here you are, she said. I knew you'd be here. He turned as if he had known she was there and then gave her that dazzling smile that still made her stomach turn over. He was wearing his white eye patch today, the one that hid most of the scar that split one eyebrow and then marked his cheek. I was watching the waves, he said teasingly. Then the smile slipped and his looked north again. I am drawn away and I don't really know why. I have a suspicion, she said quietly. Mother sent a message. The mirror is clearer. You know what that means. And danger grows to the north. Her husband looked at him in some shock, before looking at the ground in contemplation. I feared that, he said hoarsely. I am pulled there, Alara. I am pulled there. She strode to his side, placed her hands on both sides of his face, and kissed him fiercely. I know. Just promise that you will come back. He kissed back passionately, and then placed a hand on her belly. Always, he said intently. Always. And then he smirked slightly. Besides, our hall is still half built even now. She rolled her eyes at this. You and your hall. It will never be big enough for you, will it? He ran a hand down the side of her face. It is home, he said simply. It has you, and our children to be. So, yes, I may be pulled north, but I will always return to you. I love you. And I you, she said, and kissed him again. When she reluctantly freed her lips from his, she sighed. Alarian needs to talk to you. About what? He feels the pull north too. And this drove the blood from his face. No. Yes, she said gently. He came to me this morning, and he is packing even as I speak. He insists on going with you. He pulled a face and then glared at the northern sea. My blood sings in his veins. I wish it did not. Our son loves you very much, she sighed. Besides, he says that he might see the other half of the family there. He has always wondered. Oh, he laughed. I admit that I would love to see the face of my brother if he met my son. If he even still lives, the black-hearted scoundrel, very well. They strode down the seashore for a longest time, unwilling to part from each other for as long as possible, until they finally turned and made it back to the hall that was still unfinished, because of his always changing plans. Their children were waiting there. Little Darien, 3 years old now and starting to turn into as headstrong a boy as his twin sisters, Darsha and Ayla, tall pale Tarsha and then Alarian himself. He was standing there still, composed, his hands behind his back and his dark blonde hair as messy as ever. He stood a little straighter the moment that he saw his father, and then she caught his eye and nodded slightly, and something seemed to pierce that composure, relief. Her husband looked at them all, placed a hand on Alarian's shoulder and nodded at him before then kneeling before in front of the others. I am called North. You know that, don't you? They nodded with various degrees of understanding. Darien nodded because the others did so as well. The girls looked at him sadly, and Alarian, well, he stood ready. I will return. I promise you that. I and your brother will return to Mother and you in our home. You have my promise, and I always keep my promises. And then their crying children hurled themselves at him and he hugged them long and hard. Matters moved swiftly after that. Her husband liked to move quickly and pack lightly, and besides, as he said with a smile, the summer isles lacked the kind of clothes that they would need in the north, in Westeros. It was not until she saw him stand before the far wall of their bedroom and then slowly take down the cloth-wrapped shape that was on the shelf that she started to lose her composure. I thought that you would take that. He turned to her and smiled hesitantly. I paid a heavy price for it, he said, as a hand rose and then fell from his eye patch. Then he hefted it. But in the finding of it I also found you. So it reminds me both of the curse of duty and the joy of love. Besides, Alicent will need someone to teach him how to wield it one day. She nodded, the tears falling down her face, and then he was with her, folding her into his embrace. I will come back. You know that. I have given my promise to you, and I always keep my promises. She cried as she hugged him back, hot and bitter tears. And he cried too. But when they broke their embrace, he looked at her and then kissed her again. Send word to me when the babe comes. Babes. She laughed. They are twins. I feel it. They kick enough for it. He looked at her and then grinned, looking as roguish as ever. Then send word to me when the babes come. I will go first to Dorne and then take ship to White Harbor. I will write as often as I can. Alicent too. The grin faded a little. The North calls me wife. It sings in my blood. The Stark needs me in Winterfell. I wonder what my brother thinks of such a call, if he still lives. Probably such humiliation as I can ever imagine. They sailed on the next tide and she stood there and waved until her husband and son were no more than a dot on the horizon. Tarsha stood next to her, silent and red-eyed. They will return, won't they, mother? She placed a hand on her belly. Never doubt that, she said fiercely. Your father made a promise, and he always keeps his promises. A bit like he pays his debts. Robb. As he walked down the corridor, his mind was on other things. So very many other things. Things that he had done wrong the first time around, and that if it came down to again he would differently. Not that much would. Not this time. Things were so very different this time. Theon was different for one thing. He seemed less boastful and more thoughtful than before, and he had even seen him reading a few books, which was not very like the old Theon that he knew. Father had talked to him, he knew that, but about what exactly he knew not. What he did know was that Theon was different. For one thing, he seemed to be spending some time in the Godswood, not praying, not meeting anyone, just sitting and staring at the heart tree. And then there was Jon, who was not going to the wall, not going to throw his life away in what might have been a futile attempt to defend the wall from the others. No, this time it would be different. He would keep his brother close to him, as had always been the case in Winterfell. No matter what Mother said, although she had been a little more forgiving when it came to Jon, these past few weeks. He frowned slightly. Why? Had Father said something to her? He walked up a short flight of stairs and then knocked at the door. Hearing a command to enter, he opened it. Inside he found Maesters Luwin and Aemon, sitting at a table that was now covered in books, documents, pieces of paper, and above all the rolls of parchment and skin from the secret room. You wanted to see me, Maesters? We did indeed, young Robb Stark, Aemon said almost cheerily. We have need of your young eyes for a start. Mine are quite inadequate, as they no longer work, and Luwin here is struggling a little. Indeed I do, my eyes are not what they were. Luwin sighed as he put down a piece of parchment. Much of the ink has faded badly, and your Lord Father has ordered me to start making as many copies as possible. We cannot risk the loss of any other information. Aye, Aemon said grimly, too much has been lost already, and yet there is still so much that we do not understand. These parchments, some of them seem to be copies of records that have long been lost by Castle Black, which disturbs me greatly. Where could they have gone to? There was a short silence. Lost, I fear, Luwin said sadly. Who knows what was lost when so many of the castles on the wall were abandoned? Who knows what might lay in the night fort? Rooms such as the one here in Winterfell, rooms with information, and things that are now no longer understood. Robb nodded. Then let us look into what we have here, Maesters. What do you want me to look at first? And so they started off on a voyage through time, looking through old parchments that looked as old as Winterfell in places. Robb found it more than a little eerie to read the words of men long since dead and buried. More often than not, the parchments mentioned deliveries to the Night's Watch, or descriptions of things to be noted, which of course brought up a few problems. We have no context for these documents, Maester Aemon sighed. All too often they refer to things that the Starks of old, or the Night's Watch, took for granted. That last document referred to the usual delivery from the last hearth. They obviously knew what they were referring to. We, sadly, do not. This is most vexing. I feel as if we are viewing a map, but that we cannot read the names of the places on it. Something tickled at the back of Robb's mind, but he put it to one side when he realized that he couldn't quite place it. Instead, he moved on to the next one, which was an old skin with the writing very faded indeed. Pulling it close, he squinted at it and read it carefully. After a moment, he frowned. "Maesters, listen to this. When year Stark did arrive at Castle Black, he did inspect ye armory, and wrote wroth. When he did view ye weapons, crying that they were of steel and not glitter glass, as was told in ye rules handed down from ye time of heroes. But ye Lord Commander did say that ye peoples north of ye wall did vex them and that steel was needed. He looked at them. The old Night's Watch didn't use steel, they used this glitter glass. Whatever that is. Why would they do that? Unless they needed it to fight the others." Lewin nodded thoughtfully and then went scrabbling through the records. Wait, there was another reference. Here. Ah yes. And why ye Lord Commander asked why there were shards of stone in ye armory. He was told that, and the rest of the record is too faded to see. Humph. Robb, can you look at this? Robb took it and then peered at it. Yes, it was very faded. I take it that all these records will be copied out again. Both masters nodded and he quirked a smile before looking back at the piece of parchment. Was told that they were from olden times, but that the armorer knew not why they were there. There was a short silence. Weapons to use against the others is my guess, Robb said slowly as he put the pieces together. Then he turned and looked at the little pile of arrowheads to one side before picking one up. This is stone and it glitters. What is it made from? Obsidian, Lewin said slowly, which is also known as dragon glass. It can be found in old volcanoes. It's all over Dragonstone, Aemon breathed. His sightless eyes were moving from side to side as he was obviously in the grip of deep thought. A stone born out of heat, and such a heat, born from the bowels of the earth, born from fire, and with the others linked so closely to the far north and the ice there. Fire beats ice. The stone affects the others, Robb blurted, suddenly excited. The siege of the glittering crag, which became the last hearth. There are no volcanoes in the north that I know of, but if the place was an old volcano like an older version of Dragonstone, we have a weapon. Maester Aemon said with a grim intensity. We have something that can be used to fight the others, and that, my friends, is something that we must pass to Castle Black at once. We will need more obsidian and we will need to train the Night's Watch in its use, and they will resist that. Robb and Lewin both stared at the old man. Why? Robb asked eventually. Why, because they are used to their swords, their steel swords. I cannot imagine Alistair Thorne, the master-at-arms at Castle Black, taking well to being told that he needs to train the men to use stone weapons against the others. He is a humorless man enough as it is. And besides, there is another problem. We have these arrowheads, but they are a drop in the ocean to what we need. Can you say that every arrow will find their mark? And if they work against the others, do they also work against whites? The records say not about that. Well, we need steel against whites, but obsidian against the others. Can we create obsidian daggers, or swords? From I remember the stone is sharp, but also can be brittle. He smiled slightly. We have made a good start, but we have far to go. Young Robb, you have a good head for war on your shoulders. You can see the difficulties. Can you not? Robb thought the matter through. I can, he agreed. Masters, I must bring this to my Lord Father, and also Lord Umber. He will know what stones can be mined at the last hearth, and if need be, Father can send a raven to Stannis Baratheon and ask for obsidian from Dragonstone. He stood and left quickly, striding down the corridor with urgent steps, and as he did he found himself looking in the direction of the woods. Yet again, the pull was growing stronger. The direwolf that would birth Grey Wind was getting closer. He could feel it, and then he broke into a run. He had the feeling that they were starting to run out of time. Jon Arryn. Lysa was still coldly furious with him. However, he cared not a whit. He had known instinctively that it had been the right thing to do, that sending his son away from King's Landing was the only thing to do. His wife had not taken it well, had cried and screamed and then shouted hysterically that without her young sweet Robin would die, that only she could take care of her baby, that only she loved him. And there had been a look of such hatred on her face that he was quite taken aback and had ordered her confined to her rooms until she recovered her balance. Which had taken some time, although she had finally warmed a little recently, after Baelish had begged to have a word with her. John had breathed easier once word had arrived that young Robert had reached White Harbor, although he admitted that he would not truly relax until Ned sent word that the boy had arrived safe and sound at Winterfell. And why had Lord Manderley sent so large an escort with them? He tapped a finger against the side of the window that he had been staring out for the past few minutes and then shrugged internally. He had no answers, and besides he had a meeting of the small council to attend. When he reached the room he was unsurprised to find Stannis Baratheon there. He was invariably early for such meetings, as if he had an internal sundial. Robert had once actually said that, only he had been far more colorful in his terminology. "My Lord Hand," the master of ships said, standing and bowing slightly. "Lord Baratheon," John replied with a bow of his own. There was no one else there, but John knew that it would not do to mention the great matter there. He had his suspicions about the place. Too many dark corners, too many corniches, too many fireplaces, too many potential ears. And yet the great matters of the kingdom were discussed here. Who listened to what, and reported to who? Oh, this terrible game they all played. This Game of Thrones. Hearing feet he turned to the passageway to the right. Pycelle, unless he missed his guess, judging from the shuffling gait, and sure enough it was the old Grand Maester, clutching something in his hand. A message? "My Lord Hand," the older man puffed weakly, his wattles jiggling a little. "A message from His Grace the King, and a passing strange one too." John frowned and took the proffered piece of parchment. Well, it was certainly written in Robert's hand. It was near illegible, meaning that he had either been extremely drunk, or incredibly excited when he had written it. "Staying at Storm's End for a few more days. Have found lost Durrandon relic. Lost Durrandon tombs too. Robert, King of Westeros, etc., etc." Yes, passing strange was one way to put it. He handed it over to Stannis, who looked at it with a deepening scowl. "Lost Durrandon relic?" Stannis asked with as much incredulity as John thought he was capable of expressing. "What nonsense is this? Lost Durrandon tombs as well? Preposterous. I know that castle like the back of my hand. I grew up there and I was besieged there. There are no lost tombs there that I know of. Just the Baratheon ones. And yet that is what His Grace claims. Well, we must wait for his return." The sound of slippered feet could be heard approaching, and Varys appeared. A Varys who looked as puzzled as he ever appeared. Seeing the others he seemed to smooth his countenance and bowed slightly to them all. "My lords Grand Master Pycelle, I trust that you are all well." Stannis, whom John knew loathed the spider, nodded shortly before returning to his seat. "Well enough," he grated. "Better once the king returns from Storm's End." Varys nodded and then fluttered his hands a little as he himself sat at the same time as the others. "Has any word of His Grace arrived?" His trip to his ancestral home was somewhat precipitate. "Here," grunted Stannis as he handed over the message. "See what you make of that." The Master of Whispers looked at the parchment, seemed to reread it, and then looked up, his brow furrowed. "Durrandon relic? Durrandon tombs? I was unaware that such things existed." "They don't," Stannis ground out as he looked at Varys. "We'll have to wait and hear what he found, but I know nothing of any such things ever even being suspected there." There was a short pause whilst Varys seemed to absorb that information. "That would fit in with the odder snippets that my little birds have brought me on this day," he muttered, "which have been odd indeed. I see that this meeting of the smaller version of the small council has already started," a voice said to one side, and Petyr Baelish swept in to take his place at the table, placing his book of accounts down to one side. "What word of the king?" Varys passed the parchment down. The Master of Coins squinted at it and then looked up. "Relic? Tombs? At Storm's End? I am sure that His Grace will enlighten us when he returns with Lord Renly," John said, taking charge of the meeting. "Now, Varys, you said that you had odd information." The eunuch nodded. "Apparently there has been a great meeting between the Brackens and the Blackwoods at the Red Fork, 50 miles east of River Run." "Oh ho!" Baelish chuckled. "Another attempt at a truce. How many died this time? A dozen? A score? Those two families will hate each other until the end of time." But Varys greeted this with a slight clearing of the throat. "Actually, Lord Baelish, not one man died. They seem to have met and discussed most seriously an end to the enmity between the two houses. And then they swore a great oath to protect the land against," he wound down. "Against?" John prompted gently as they all stared at the eunuch. Against the others, Varys finally said, looking around the table. My little birds were very exact on that term, because I questioned it. Oddly enough, it was Pycelle who first spoke next. Preposterous. The others are but a northern myth. Ah, Lord Varys, I fear that your little birds have led you astray, Baelish said with a slow shake of his head. The others. Rank madness. Normally I would agree with you, Varys said with more than a little hauteur. If it were not for my other news. From Essos I hear that the Sellsword Company, the Company of the Rose, are seeking passage across the narrow sea. Apparently they claim that their time of exile is over. Time of exile? They are hardly Westerosi anymore. They are the descendants of those that would not bend the knee to the Targaryens when they obtained the surrender of the North. Stannis exclaimed. Why would they want to return? Who is paying them? Apparently no one, Varys said quietly. It is most confusing. Then it is my turn to add to the confusion, Jon broke in. I have had word of two most peculiar things. The first is from the Vale. Apparently some days ago the leaders of the mountain clans appeared before the Bloody Gate. All 10 of them. This seemed to stun Baelish, who as a Vale Lord knew how bizarre this news was. Impossible. All 10? All 10, Lord Baelish, and you know how likely that is. Not even a little, Baelish muttered. Then he looked at him, his eyes narrowed. What did they want? Apparently to say that they will return, that the Eyrie should not think that their absence means that their battle for their old rights has been suspended. Absence, my Lord Hand? Varys asked, his eyebrows heading upwards again. According to the Blackfish, Sir Brynden Tully, who was at the Bloody Gate, the mountain clans said that they are going to the north, that the others have returned, and that they are heeding some kind of call. He looked at their faces. Had this news come from anyone else than the Blackfish, I would have thought them mad. However, he is reliable. Another silence. Pycelle broke it. Preposterous, but it sounded weak. Grand Maester Pycelle, Jon said eventually. Is it true that the Citadel at Old Town has announced that the glass candles can now be relit? The joggle of the Waddles gave them all their answer before the wretched man said another word. I have sent a raven back to the Citadel, he said eventually, asking them to confirm that message. As it is insane. Magic has gone from this world. Jon looked around the table, and then he saw that Varys was pale and trembling, his eyes on something that no one else could see. Lord Varys, are you well? The others looked at the eunuch as well, who finally noticed that he was being stared at and offered them all a weak smile. Your pardon, my lords, he said shakily. Bad memories. Talk of magic brings on bad memories. Perhaps, Pycelle wheezed, you might need bloodletting, my Lord Varys. Yes. Looking at you I can see that your humors are out of balance. The eunuch shot a dirty look at the Grand Master. My humors, Grand Master, are exactly where they need to be and do not need correcting with a bloodletting. Pycelle leant back in his chair and humped with disgust. You know nothing about modern medicine, he muttered. Plus I have a new bloodletting device. With 6 blades. If I may return to the purpose of this meeting, Jon broke in. Grand Maester, the messages about the glass candles have gone out to every major house in Westeros, and even some of the free cities by now. I hardly think that it can be a mistake, not without having been corrected by now. Pycelle seemed to slump a little in his chair at this, whilst Varys closed his eyes for a long moment, but then reopened them as he seemed to rally. What would you have us do, my Lord Hand? The eunuch asked the question in a very steady voice. Something bizarre is happening and we need to find out exactly what. And the king will soon be returning from Storm's End, so that we can get to the bottom of what he found there. In the meantime, we still have to ensure the smooth running of the realm. And so they plunged back into the business of the realm, Baelish with his woeful accounts, Pycelle with his expostulations about the health of the city, and then Stannis with his growled update on the current state of the royal fleet. As he watched them all, Jon wondered about them. Stannis was the one man he could trust. Pycelle seemed to have ties to the queen. Thank the gods she was not present, although Pycelle would soon relay what they had discussed back to her. And Baelish, well, he was still having doubts about the man. Yes, he was very skilled at finding revenue in the most unlikely places, but he seemed to be, well, far too amused by things, as well as on no one's side but his own. That said, something seemed to be worrying the smooth little man a little today. There were small, tiny indications, a tap of a finger on the table, a look at the window occasionally. What could be wrong? Jon shrugged a little internally. He knew not. They ran through the meeting, and then as they went their separate ways, a man in Baratheon livery appeared out of a doorway to one side, and then silently bowed to Stannis, and passed on a piece of paper. Stannis took it silently, nodded and then looked around them. It was just Jon, Stannis Baratheon, and the messenger. Ser Davos Seaworth has returned, Stannis muttered quietly, and he requests an urgent and most secret meeting with us both. Renly, he sat on the low wall and looked about Storm's End. Robert was training Edric again on the grass sword, showing him the best way to keep his balance when he swung his warhammer, how to move his feet, what to look for in the eyes of an opponent. The boy was drinking in every word with a slight frown of concentration. Now that Robert was clean-shaven again that day, it was as if he was instructing a miniature version of himself. Renly suppressed a slight wince. Oh, the boy was having an impact on his father. Hopefully Robert wouldn't do something stupid and take him back to King's Landing with him. Cersei would not like that at all. In fact, the bitch queen of Casterly Rock might view the boy as a direct threat to Joffrey. He thought about the other lad for a moment. Joffrey looked nothing like Edric. Come to that, he looked nothing like Robert. But then he himself looked little enough like Stannis, so you could never tell with the way the family tree twisted its branches. That said, he almost wished that Edric was legitimate. He was a nice boy, far nicer than that little monster Joffrey. Renly looked north for a moment, and then scowled a little. Yes, he was feeling it too. It seemed to be stronger here in Storm's End. What it was of course another matter. He just felt this pressing need to be somewhere further north than he was at this time. Judging by the way that Robert and Edric would occasionally look north as well, they felt the same thing. He wondered if Stannis felt it, and then dismissed the thought of their brother actually trusting in a non-rational instinct. Hearing voices to one side, he looked over to see the Castellan and the Maester stroll past, deep in conversation. Penrose had carefully searched the catacombs that no one had even known even existed again, and it looked Jyrna had found something. He strolled over, and as he approached the two saw him and bowed respectfully. So what's the latest discovery? Renly asked with a smile. My lord, Jyrna replied, or rather gabbled a little from excitement. I have found a reference in the archives. It seems that after word came of the last storm and the death of Argilac, the arrogant, there was a short pause before Ores Baratheon arrived here at Storm's End, and whilst Argella waited for him in defiance, having proclaimed herself the Storm Queen, she gave orders that her father's things be put away safe for another day. Now every thought that such words merely referred to her father's personal possessions. But what if they did not? He thought this over and then nodded. Yes, but wait, didn't her own garrison rebel against her and hand her over to Ores in chains? Aye, Penrose said quietly, but what if that was all a mummer's farce? To hide the relics and the tombs and anything else, they made it look as if there had been a riot and a rebellion against Argella. Renly stroked his chin thoughtfully. That would make sense, he muttered. Has anything else been found there? The other two men looked at each other before the master nodded slowly. I have translated the runes around the statue, he said quietly. The sword is Stormbreaker, the legendary sword of Durin Godsgrief, or so the legends say. The hairs on the back of his neck rose up and he shivered a little, before looking over at where the sword was resting, on a table, wrapped in a cloak, with Ser Barristan Selmy watching over it. The sword fascinated him, but then that was unsurprising. It fascinated everyone who saw it. That is, everyone that Robert allowed near it. His brother was as transfixed by their ancestral sword as anyone else. And oddly enough, it was Ser Barristan Selmy who seemed the most fascinated by the tombs of the Durrandons. Although the statue troubled him, he did not blame the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard. The statue troubled him too. The sight of those stone eyes burning red and that terrible voice speaking, telling Robert to go north. Thank you, he said quietly, dismissing the two, and then he strode over to the table and the old Kingsguard, who seemed to have one eye on the sword and the other on Robert. Ser Barristan. My lord, the older man said with a respectful nod. His Grace seems to be enjoying his training session with his son. Renly looked over to the two, where Robert was now crouched at the same level as Edric, adjusting his stance a little. Both had almost identical brilliant smiles on their faces. The art of the Warhammer, Ser Barristan. Not else like it for my brother, although I do think that he will soon be pressing to learn how to wield this weapon. He already has, Selmy said with a slight grimace. Very early this morning, I am told. I saw you talking with Sar Courtenay and Maester Jern. Is there any further news about the catacombs? Apparently the sword has a name, Stormbreaker. Selmy blinked hard at this. Gods be good, he breathed. Do we really live in a time where legends come alive again? My ancestors fought for the Storm Kings, and Stormbreaker was said to be a mighty weapon. No one has seen it for many centuries, though. You saw the statue, Ser Barristan, Renly said quietly. You saw it. Selmy's head dipped for a long moment. I did, he said softly, and suddenly I have doubts about the seven. Something calls to me, my lord. I cannot say what. Some part of me that has the blood of the first men. Some part of me that wishes that there was a godswood here. Strange to think that I should have such thoughts now. Renly, Ser Barristan, Robert was striding towards them now, as Edric continued to practice his swings. What do you think of him? The Kingsguard cast an eye at the lad. He swings it well, your grace, as if he was born to it. Aye, Robert said as he grabbed a mug of weak ale and then drank from it. Gods, I've got a thirst on me, and I ache like I have not for years. But 'tis good to be here again, and to spar properly. And it was true. Robert was still fat, but a little less than before, and there was an energy to him, a life that fair crackled off him like lightning. Robert Jern had news. The sword of the Durrandons. Well, it has a name. His brother looked at him sharply. What name? Stormbreaker. Robert stared at them, astonished. He is sure. He is sure. There was a long pause, and then Robert's face set in a look of implacable determination. Very well then. Ser Barristan. Your grace? It seems that I require training in the use of such a sword. You are the finest swordsman that I know of. Will you assist me? The Lord Commander of the Kingsguard blinked at his king for a moment, and then he nodded. With everything I have, your grace. Good, because we have little time. I was right. War does march on the Seven Kingdoms. Why else would we find Stormbreaker now? What gods now control our destiny? He looked over at Edric, who had stopped practicing and was now looking at them with concern. My son, where does the wind call you? The boy looked confused for a moment, and then a look that seemed to mirror his father crossed his face. North, father. North indeed. Pack your things. I am sending you and Ser Cordnay to Winterfell. You'll learn to fight there, and we. Robert looked at Renly and Selmy, the latter looking as if he had heard the horns of war itself, judging by the way that he was flaring his nostrils. We are going back to King's Landing. The realm must be put in order. Jory. The moment that he caught sight of the broken tower, he let out a deep sigh of relief that he hadn't even known that he'd been holding in. Winterfell. They were within sight of Winterfell. It wasn't as if they had had a hard or difficult journey. The King's Road had been its usual self, and had even been repaired in a few places, so they had made good progress. It had instead been the constant vigilance required the entire time, that need to eye any fellow travelers on the road, especially those on horseback, carefully, and also keep an eye on the tree line whenever the road went through a wood. And with every league that passed, he found himself marveling over the difference in the little lordling. When they had left White Harbor, he'd been riding on Anna's lap, bundled in furs and yet looking around him with an increasingly keen gaze. These past 2 days he'd been on a horse of his own, albeit one that was tied to that of one of Lord Manderley's men. He wanted to learn how to ride. He wanted to learn how to use a bow. He wanted to learn how to use his dagger. He wanted so very many things. So no, he was not the same boy. Lord Arryn would likely not recognize him, without his pallor and the dark circles under his eyes. Instead, he looked like a healthy little boy. He had not had a shaking fit for days now, and Jory stared at the trees fiercely in an effort to hide his glare of fury. How could someone do that to the child? Hearing hooves to one side, he looked back to see Duncan, the man in charge of Lord Manderley's escort, approach. Winterfell is ahead. We should prepare to enter the castle in a manner befitting the son of Lord Arryn. He nodded at that. Aye, we should. Banners to the fore, if you please. He then waved at Willits, and the Volman trotted up. Winterfell approaches. We need to announce the arrival of Robert Arryn. Willits, who was a terse man of few if any words, nodded shortly and then smiled crookedly. We have a banner, he said quietly, before nodding and then riding off to talk to Rickson, who fumbled in a saddlebag. And so it was that some hours later the party clattered through the main gate of Winterfell, led by the sky-blue falcon soaring against a white moon, on a sky-blue field of House Arryn, and the white merman, with dark green hair, beard and tail, carrying a black trident, over a blue-green field of House Manderley. They had, of course, long been seen and noted and reported on, and as they drew rein, Jory could see the familiar figures of Lord and Lady Stark striding towards them. He dismounted and bowed formally to them both as they drew up to him. "My lord, my lady, I brought Robert Arryn, the son of Lord Arryn, the hand of the king. To you I have fulfilled my oath to Lord Arryn that I would bring him here safe and sound." Lord Stark looked at him and then nodded. "You have done well, Jory Castle." And then he smiled and clapped him on the shoulder. "Lord Manderley sent word of your departure. You have made good time. And you must be Robert," Lady Stark said, with a reassuring smile at the now solemn little boy on his horse, which was now being held by the bridle by Willits. "I am Catelyn Stark, your aunt." "And I am Lord Eddard Stark, your uncle," Lord Stark rumbled. "Welcome to Winterfell." The little lordling stiffened in the saddle a little and then nodded solemnly. "Aunt, uncle, I am very pleased to see you." And then he swallowed. "Lady Stark, your hair is like my mother's and—" He stopped there, his face slightly twisted as he obviously tried to hold back his tears. The boy was young and tired and had been traveling for so very many days. Lady Stark quickly smiled and reached out and gathered him into her arms, as he slumped out of his saddle and then allowed her to take him away, followed by an anxious Anna. Willits and Rickson stamped, bowed and then followed them, leaving Jory and Lord Stark with the rest of the men. "You've done well," Lord Stark said, with a smile at the mounted men. "There is hot food and ale waiting for you, in the barracks. Beds too and baths. My thanks to Lord Manderley will go to White Harbor today, by Raven, and I'll make sure that he knows of your good service." The men nodded and bowed, well pleased, and as they passed on to the barracks, Lord Stark turned to Jory. "A powerful escort," he said quietly. "Why such numbers?" "I have much to tell you, my lord. Lady Stark too. Perhaps we should talk in private. The nurse Anna will need to be there too." Lord Stark looked at him and then nodded. "Let us go to my solar then. Given that this is likely about my nephew, I will ask your uncle to be there too. Maester Luwin too, my lord. There is something that he needs to see. Oh," and he pulled out the sealed leather wallet. "I also have a letter from Lord Arryn, my lord. Ned." By the time that Cat and a grim-faced Anna entered the room, Ned had read and reread John's letter. It worried him. "My dear Ned, thank you for your letter and your warning about bad products coming out of the West. You may be very sure that I will be keeping a close eye on the West indeed. I would like to know how you smelt the trouble on the wind, but that is a conversation that we must have face to face, I think. I know how hard it is for you to come to King's Landing, just as you know how hard it is for me to come to Winterfell, so perhaps a meeting in Riverrun instead. I will send word soon. In the meantime, I entrust the care of my son to you for fostering. It is time that he knew his family in the north. And from good brother to good brother, I must tell you that he worries me. His mother smothers him with too much affection at times, and because the child is sickly, she often refuses to let him out of her sight. Hopefully by fostering him with you, I can bring him out of her shadow and turn him into an Arryn of the Vale. I am sending his nurse Anna with him, who knows about his medicine, and also 2 of my men, Willits and Rickson. All have served me well over the years, and should be trusted. News might reach you soon about events here at King's Landing. Your help might be required. I will write more soon. Jon Arryn, Hand of the King, Lord of the Vale, etc. So Jon knew something, as they had suspected. What exactly did he know, though? How long had he known it? Who suspected that he knew it? Was the news from Lysa Arryn and that other future that the Lannisters had poisoned Jon accurate, given what that future cat had told Robb about her sister's near madness? So many things to consider. So many things to worry about. Luwin and Roderick Castle were quietly talking to Jory in the corner. He glanced at the group and then made a mental note that none of them would die in the future, not if he could help it. And then Cat and Anna entered. "Jory, your report please?" "Lord Stark, we sailed north on a ship commanded by Ser Davos Seaworth, one of Lord Stannis Baratheon's best men, and when we drew up to the east of the Fingers, Ser Davos came to me with most worrying news. One of the men that joined the crew at King's Landing was a ne'er-do-well, a man who was going to damage the ship enough to force it to seek harbor, and once there he intended to set a fire, slip a knife in my ribs and vanish in the confusion with Lord Arryn's son." Ned and others all stared at him, whilst Roderick scowled and muttered something about never trusting a bloody sailor. "Why would he kidnap my nephew?" Cat asked faintly, looking horrified. "For coin. He had orders, my lady," Sir Davos questioned him most carefully and discovered the name of the man who had given him those orders. Lord Petyr Baelish. Ned looked at Jory quickly. According to Robb, Littlefinger had promised him help in King's Landing, but then either betrayed him or been outmaneuvered. Either way, he was not to be trusted. And then he looked at Cat. She had turned whiter than milk. "You are sure about this, Jory Castle?" Cat asked. "I know Lord Baelish. I grew up with him." Jory reached into his pocket and pulled out a letter. "Sir Davos lacks his letters, my lady, but this was written by Lord Manderley." She looked at Ned, received his nod and then took and opened it, after reading it quickly. "It is as he says," she said in a voice filled with resigned shock. "Petyr Baelish is not the man I knew. He can no longer be trusted." She handed it over to Ned, who glanced at it quickly. Yes, it all was as Jory had said. "Thank you, Jory," Ned said quietly. "You have done good work."
"My lord," Jory broke in.
"There is more. When Sir Davos found out the plot, he ordered that the guards on Lord Aaron's son be doubled. One of the guards knocked over the medicine for Lord Aaron's son for his shaking fits. Sir Davos reassured us that he knew of an apothecary in White Harbor, who could probably ascertain what the medicine was and then make up some more. But when Sir Davos and Anna went to the apothecary, well, Anna, I had better let you tell the tale. Anna was a slightly hard-faced Vale woman about the same age as Jory, if Ned had to guess, and she stepped forwards and pulled out a stone jar from a pocket. "My lord, my lady, Sir Davos brought me to the apothecary, Barlan he was, by name, and we showed him the medicine that Lady Arryn had directed me to give young Robert Arryn. But when Barlan inspected, he frowned and sniffed it, and then sneezed most violent and held it away from him. And then he asked us why we had brought him poison instead of medicine." Ned stared at her, as did all the others bar Jory, who was standing there with his hands behind his back, as grim-faced as his father had ever been. Cat looked openly horrified. "Poison? Surely not." "Poison, my lady," Anna said in a voice like iron. "He was most clear. Said that it was a mixture of some kind of metal and powdered chalk." "My lord, my lady, Lord Manderley questioned the man and gave me this to give to you about what he said it was. Something from Essos, I believe." And Jory handed over a second letter bearing Manderley's seal. Ned took it, opened it, with Cat suddenly standing next to him, and they both read it, finishing it at about the same time. When they finished it, he met her appalled gaze. "Who?" she said with a note of horror in her voice, as she sank into a chair. "Who could have done this? Why would they do it?" All of a sudden, Ned had some horrible suspicions in his head, but he watched as an ashen-faced Lewin inspected the contents of the jar. "'Tis called shadow root, my lord. I have witnessed this once before. It is not common, and it is used over time to weaken someone and give them fits." "Aye," Anna said, and there was fury in her voice, "and we were told that we could not simply stop giving it to the little lordling, but instead diminish how much he got day by day to wean him off it." "Exactly right," Lewin said as he stoppered the jar and then brushed his hands clean. "People who have been poisoned by this noxious powder do best by being exposed to less and less of it as time goes on, until they are free of it." "We have done so," Anna said quietly, "and Lord Aaron's son has greatly changed as a result. He has not had a shaking fit in many days now, and every day that passes he changes, my lord. He is a different boy from the one that left King's Landing. He has come alive." I can testify to that, my lord," Jory said with a smile. "When I first met him in King's Landing, I thought, your pardon, my lady, I mean no offense, that the boy was a lackwit. But with every day that has passed since White Harbor, he has indeed changed. Fair bombards you with questions about the world around him for a start." "My lord," Roderick Castle rumbled as he stood, "I must tell the guards to watch every visitor from the south. If there has been one attempt to seize the lad, along with an attempt at poisoning him, who knows what else will come to threaten him, and Winterfell." "Agreed," Ned said after a moment of thought. "Warn the guards. Lewin, will you inspect the boy, once he awakes? I think that we would all feel happier once we knew that my nephew is free of this poison. Jory, my thanks again, and you too, Anna. I have no doubt that Lord Arryn will also send his thanks once he knows of all of this." "He should know soon, my lord," Jory sighed. "Sir Davos sailed south with all the information we have just given you." Ned nodded. "Good. Thank you all," and then he watched all but Cat file out of his solar. Once they were gone and the door was closed, he turned to his wife. "Cat," she stood shakily. "He is but a boy. Why would someone poison him? He grimaced. Robb said that the other you, the you from the future, said that Lysa was, well, unstable, if not insane. There, the word was out. It was brutal, but it was out. She dotes on the boy, but she needs him to be dependent on her. There was a pause whilst Kat struggled to absorb this. Ned, my sister, sat in the eyrie and refused to lift a finger to help you, or our son during his war, according to Robb's memories. And he said that you told him that Lysa was wrong in the head. For such a person, this might make sense. The medicine would make him totally dependent on her. I like it not, but it is the only conclusion that I can come to. Where did she get this medicine, from whom, and for what purpose? Kat looked at him desperately and then closed her eyes in defeat. I do not know, she whispered, but we cannot allow her anywhere near him until we have more information. He nodded and then held her in his arms. I know, he whispered. He's just a boy, but that boy is the son of Jon Arryn, and I will protect him, no matter what it takes. Tyrion, he hated to admit it, but the records were absolutely fascinating, he thought as he lay on his bed in the ship and tried not to think about the motion from the sea. He never thought that he could ever say such a thing, but they really were fascinating. He had brought books of his own on this trip, and he had actually finished one, a fascinating discourse on the possible cause of the cataclysm that had claimed Valyria. But it had been the little book on the runes that could be found on certain lower levels of Casterly Rock that had attracted his attention. The book that some maester called Hamil had written back in the days of his great-grandfather. The runes themselves could be found in an old storeroom to the north of the rock, and he remembered that room quite clearly. When he had been a child, he'd once asked Jaime what they had meant, and had been answered with a shrug and a muttered comment about perhaps Uncle Jerion knowing. Uncle Jerion had smiled and shrugged himself. Perhaps they date back to Lan himself. Tyrion, we know very little about the early history of the rock. Keep asking questions, my boy. You have quite the inquiring mind. Just don't ask your father. He has a set view of the history of our family. He had heeded that advice, and now he knew why Uncle Jerion had said what he had said. The runes were very old and dated back to the time of the first men. To the time of Lan, allegedly, and the runes, whilst being unclear, at least hinted at Lan the Clever being purely of the first men, and not Pardandal, which Tyrion found fascinating. What had happened to the Casterlys? How had the Lannisters gotten hold of the rock, really? Not the legends, not the tales, the truth. And the other records held other accounts, other odd references, the sending of men north to the wall. Why? Some kind of ceremony. It sounded like one, something that had long since been abandoned. And then, that reference to Iaf Glitterglass. Be founded then word is to be sent to ye Stark at once. Glitterglass? Was that a reference to obsidian? Perhaps it was. Fascinating, but why send word to ye Stark? For what reason? He had to admit that Uncle Jerion had been right not to mention any of this to father. For one thing, it implied a greater degree of influence for the Starks of Winterfell. But again, thinking of Uncle Jerion made him pause for a long moment. Where was he? Could he really be dead, in that never-ending quest for Bright Roar? He hated to think that that warm smile and that bright wit could ever be gone. The world would be diminished without that man. His world especially. Uncle Jerion was a good man. He still could not think of him in the past tense. Even his father had written him off as dead, lost somewhere in the east. He took a sip of wine and then stared at the wooden walls of his cabin, forcing his mind away from that fell subject. Perhaps this trip was not entirely without interest, and at least this part was not too onerous. By ship from Lannisport to Seaguard and then the ride northwards. He wasn't looking forwards to the twins, as from all accounts Lord Frey was an old and unpleasant man who liked to wring what he could out of guests. Well, he would pass through as quickly as possible, protected by his family name. His father had given him that at least. No Frey would ever think to get a thing out of a Lannister. Then he sat up suddenly. Someone up on deck was shouting, quite loudly. He pulled his boots on quickly, and then got down and waddled to the door as fast as possible, just in time to nearly get bumped in the face by the door as it was opened by young John, the cabin boy. Your pardon, my lord. The captain's compliments, and would you please join him on deck? Lead on, Tyrion muttered and then watched as the boy vanished. He had his suspicions about the lad. He looked so much like Captain Harkland that he strongly suspected that the boy was his bastard son. Reaching the deck, he blinked as men ran past clutching various weapons, all looking either angry or as if they were about to piss themselves in terror. He watched them go by and then climbed the steps to the fore, whatever it was, where the captain was peering ahead at something. "Is there trouble ahead, good captain?" Captain Harklin, who had been carping these past few days at the lack of other ships, peered at him and pointed. "We have company, mayhaps Ironborn, but 'tis too soon to tell." Tyrion peered cautiously over the gunwale, or whatever it was called. Far ahead there was indeed a sail, and it seemed to be heading towards them. "I thought that the Ironborn was supposed to be behaving themselves, after the king's noble quest to see how many of their heads he could squash with that warhammer of his." "Oh, they have been," Captain Harklin muttered as he peered at the ship through his Marish spyglass. "But I haven't lived this long in these waters by trusting Ironborn scum as far as I can throw them. They might not reeve any more at the moment, but the moment they think they can get away with it, they'll go back to their old ways." "Wait. Aha! I know that ship. It's old Foswell's ship, the Sea Bull." Blinking hard, Tyrion looked at the man. "I wasn't aware that any such creature existed." "Oh, it doesn't. But he was drunk at the time, and it was a better idea than the other ones that he came up with. He started off with Arsa Kicker and then moved on to Kraken Walloper, and then Squid Squasher. A good man, but he lost a brother to the Ironborn and fought with Old Stoneface's fleet at the Siege of Pike." "Old Stoneface?" Tyrion thought about this for a moment. "Do you mean Stannis Baratheon?" "That's the man. Your pardon, John. Fetch me my speaking trumpet." Bosun prepared to spill the wind a little in the sails. "We'll need to lose some speed to speak with him. I like not the fact that we've barely seen an Ironborn ship these past 3 days." The ship seemed to come alive as men ran back for forth, doing nautical things that involved pulling on ropes and then apparently releasing what looked like the same rope. It made Tyrion tired just watching them. If, the gods forbid, he ever had to do anything naval, he'd do it from the safety of a big chair on the quarterdeck, with a saucy wench in minimal clothing next to him, holding a bottle of wine no doubt. He was distracted from this appealing thought by the sound of a hail from the other ship, which was also slowing. A man dressed in the same kind of clothes as the captain was standing at the pointy end and was holding a speaking trumpet. "Good gods," he called out. "Are you still sailing that death trap? Hasn't her keel fallen off yet?" "No better than that old scow you're mishandling over there," Harklin bellowed back through his own trumpet. "Where are you from and where are you bound?" "Seaguard via 10 fucking towers heading to Lannisport. Avoid the Iron Islands, my friend." Harklin frowned as he started to walk towards the blunt end, so as to keep pace with the other man. "Why?" "They're wailing about their religion again. Damfair's gone mad and is killing people who mention the old gods." A number of crew started at this and muttered, whilst Tyrion looked at the other captain with narrowed eyes. The old gods again. Yes, something was most certainly up. The problem was that he didn't believe what seemed to be happening, which was a little inconvenient, especially given his dreams of late. Those cold blue eyes that stared at him, and then the roar that seemed to split the heavens and shake the earth beneath his feet. "What do they say?" Harklin shouted. There was a pause as the other man seemed to think about what he should say. "Some feel the call north, and some heard it. The others come. The Stark calls for aid. You are needed. The blood of the first men, my friend. May your winds be fair." And the other ship was past them, heading on that opposite course. Harklin stared after it, and then as if in afterthought he shouted back, "May your winds be fair." He seemed stunned, as did more than a few others, and then as Tyrion watched he recovered his wits. "Bosun, more sail. Take her north a point or two closer to the wind. All hands prepare to rig another sail." Tyrion watched as the organized chaos thundered past him, before walking slowly and thoughtfully back to his cabin, where he picked up the little book. He was about to plunge back into the joy of research when he heard a knock on the door and he looked up to see Harklin at the entrance. "We're putting on more sail so as to get to Seaguard quicker. 'Tis a little risky, but we need to get you to Seaguard as soon possible. If the winds were set right, I'd actually pass through the Iron Islands, past Flint's Finger and as far into Blazewater Bay as possible, to get you to Moat Cailin, but we cannot do that just now. Besides, you need the King's Road and good steeds." He smiled slightly. "I may sail from Lannisport now, but I was born in Ramsgate. I have seen many strange things and heard many strange tales, but right now I am of the north, and as you have books and such about the time of heroes, 'tis my duty to get you to Winterfell at once." And that Tyrion could do was nod somberly and say his thanks, and then returned to his books.